So what do you know about Texas v. Johnson, 1989? Texas v. Johnson was a Scalia decision. Scalia, this is one of the harbingers. This is one of the greats. This is one of the conservative Supreme Court justices that everybody, when you read the opinion, you always go to the Scalia opinion. Scalia is a conservative giant, just like Justice Marshall, Thurgood Marshall. Or was it Earl Warren? So Scalia, Texas v. Johnson, 5-4 decision, sure. But it says we get to burn the flag. Here in America, because we have the right to free speech, if you burn the flag and you do it for expression, political statement, and there's no danger to anybody, there's no threats that are made, there's no injuries to property or no threats, you get to burn the American flag. You get to burn the American flag because that is speech. That is speech. Why am I talking about Texas v. Johnson? Because you just had this Jan Carey. This incredible veteran, 54-year-old veteran out of North Carolina. He's going to protest an executive order the day that it drops. So the president says, you can't burn the American flag or you go to jail for 1 fucking year. If you burn the American flag, you go to jail for 1 fucking year. There's so many goddamn executive orders. You know, when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, they had talked about that all year long. There was a ton of deliberation about how to unveil it. They needed military victory in order to unveil it. It was right after the midterm elections of 1862. It was January 1st, 1863 is when the Emancipation Proclamation comes into play. Compared to presidents that just fucking shit out a fucking executive order. Here's another executive order, shit it out. Here's another executive order, shit it out. So he was protesting the order. He was protesting the order. He was a veteran. He was a veteran from 1989 to 2012. This happened on August 25th in Lafayette Park. And what did Jan Carey said? Jan Carey, 54-year-old American veteran who's protesting the executive order to not burn the American flag, says his oath wasn't to a dictator. His oath was to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. And they're going to charge him with 2 misdemeanors. But let's just talk about Texas v. Johnson, and we'll get back to the details of this Jan Carey. Because frankly, if the Supreme Court wants to say that they say what they mean and they mean what they say, okay, go ahead and question some of the precedents, but you're going to go against Scalia precedent? I once heard that a good way to defeat fascism, you could do social democracy, coalitions, international coalitions, anti-fascism, communism, anarchism. You could do classical liberalism. You could do conservatism. Being a conservative kills being a fascist. So this Texas v. Johnson case, this Jan Carey, they should take it straight to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court should just knock this motherfucker out of the goddamn park. You have a right to the First Amendment. You have a right to the First Amendment. So let's talk about Johnson, Texas v. Johnson, 1989. This is a certiorari. They call a cert petition for short, to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. So this went straight from the appeals court, state appeals court, to the Supreme Court. A guy named Johnson, Gregory Lee Johnson, who's like a rabid communist. He's like a young communist or some shit. So he's a radical, and he's protesting Ronald Reagan, the Republican convention in 1984 in Dallas, Texas. Gregory Lee Johnson is going to get convicted of desecration of a venerated object, which is a violation of Texas statute, and the appeals court had affirmed, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. It says reversed. So is that the Supreme Court? The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals? How stupid. So whatever, in trial court it gets convicted, the appeals court upholds it, it goes to the Supreme Court of Texas, and then certiorari to the Supreme Court. And Scalia says, you got a right to burn the American flag. You got a right to burn the American flag. Why? Because the First Amendment is about expression. He was expressing himself. Nobody was threatened with injury, and there were no physical injuries. There were no physical injuries. There was no destruction of property except for the property of the flag burning. Now, the flag was taken from somebody else, so they could have charged him with theft, but what they cannot charge him with is desecration of a venerated object. I once heard because of the First Amendment, the right to free speech and the right to express yourself, technically nothing is sacred in America. There's nothing that's sacred. We could try to elevate a bunch of things up to the level of being sacred, but the First Amendment says we get to say fuck whatever. So you want to say what? Your parents are sacred? Yeah, well, fuck your parents. You want to say God is sacred? Well, fuck God. You want to say the American flag is sacred? Well, fuck the American flag. And that's one of the best things about America, is that it's not that I just want to go around burning flags or whatever, but you have a right to do so. We have the right to speak our mind. So when Gregory Lee Johnson took the American flag, the protesters were chanting. They were chanting, America, red, white, and blue, we spit on you. Oh my gosh. And people want to, act like that's so extreme. You know what somebody else did? They took the American flag that Gregory Lee Johnson had burnt, and they took it back to their home and they buried it in the backyard. That's fuck more crazy than burning the American flag. Oh my God, I can't believe the American flag was burnt. Proper American flag etiquette, if it gets worn out, if it gets dirty, if it gets tattered, if it doesn't look like the perfect, immaculate American flag, you're supposed to burn it. You're supposed to destroy it. So the holding for Texas v. Johnson is precisely this. Johnson's conviction for flag desecration is inconsistent with the First Amendment. Oh, desecration of a venerated object. The First Amendment says if you desecrate a venerated object, it was for a clearly political protest, for expressive conduct, you're allowed to do it. Now, in the majority opinion, which was written by William Brennan Jr., is that William J. Brennan Jr.? Brennan mentions this one court case, U.S. v. O'Brien. The test from U.S. v. O'Brien was not used. The test had something to do with an important government interest in regulating non-speech justified incidental limitations on an interest in preventing breaches of peace not implicated on record. So, for instance, a breach of the peace. But my God, this fucking opinion kind of opens the door of, all these different avenues that you can take. That's what they did. They arrested those black pastors in Tupelo, Mississippi. There's a famous Supreme Court case. That's where fucking qualified immunity comes from. It's not Stump v. Sparkman. It was a different one. The name might come to me later on. But to get somebody for a breach of the peace, I could say, go fuck yourself. That's a breach of the peace. I could, wear fuck the police t-shirt. That's a breach of the peace. Breach of the peace is one of those low-level bullshit things where it's like, hey, you exist. Well, that's fucking up my peace. My domestic tranquility is being fucked up right now because you exist. Breach of the peace is just some bullshit charge that you can kind of charge anybody for doing anything. You exist. You're walking on the sidewalk. You ran in front of this person. You walked over here. You did this. You did that thing. It's a bullshit. Sometimes, if you have to charge the person, and you can breach the peace, right? Somebody comes into some crowded place and they're just, cussing up a storm, drunk as hell, and they just go on for an hour. Okay, that's, a breach of the peace. But somebody just telling a cop to go fuck themselves, stop fucking throwing a bunch of dumbass petty charges. We live in a free country, so cops should be equally vigilant when it comes to the violent felonies, just as they are defending nonviolent freedoms.